Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shannon Serrato. I'm the Director of Engagement here at Cradle-to-Career. And we are so glad to have you all joining us today. And happy International Women's Day. Hooray. Before we jump into today's session, I want to go over a bit of housekeeping with you all. So this meeting is being recorded and will be made available on our C2C YouTube page, as well as on our Get Involved and community conversations in the coming days. Equity and accessibility are central to our work as we build the data system, and our meetings are now available in languages needed for the populations that we serve. So beginning, today's session is available with closed caption. It's closed caption enabled. So to launch, you can turn on captions by clicking the three dots at the far right bottom of your screen and select captions. You can also select your preferred language by launching the CC button at the bottom of your screen. We're also glad to once again have Spanish interpretation services offered, and we'll be joined today by Mark Gutierrez and Leticia Reina, who will be providing those today. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mark for a few instructions on how to enable interpretation services.
Thank you. Muy buenas tardes a todos que nos acompañan, que deseen escuchar el programa en español. Tenemos interpretación al vivo. Lo que quiera hacer, por favor, en la parte inferior de su pantalla encontrará un icono con un globo. Por favor, selecciónelo. Ahí dice Interpretation o Interpretación. Luego seleccione su idioma, Spanish o español. De ahí podrá escuchar el programa enteramente en español el día de hoy. Gracias. And of course, just a reminder, we have interpretation services being offered for today's session. To listen to any comments or questions given in Spanish, please do the same. Select the globe icon at the bottom of your screen that says Interpretation. Then select your language, English, and you'll then be able to hear a live rendering of that comment into English. Thank you, Shannon. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Mark. And so on that note, I want to flag that while folks are being muted for today's session, you can always add your comments or questions into the chat. And we will also have a Q&A at the tail end of today's session, so you can ask them there as well. And finally, we will be utilizing our community guidelines that we've created with you all today, or not today, but in previous sessions. We want to foster a brave and respectful shared space. And so we look forward to continuing to build that community today. So thank you again for acknowledging our community guidelines. We look forward to having today's session with you all. So a little bit more about Cradle-to-Career. California's Cradle-to-Career data system was named in state legislation to be California's source of actionable data and research on education, economic and health outcomes for individuals, families, and communities. C2C has been envisioned to be the most inclusive data system of its kind in the nation, and we deploy a three-pronged approach of community engagement to inform the development, interpretation, and awareness building about the data system. We are scaling tools to support college planning and transition, and we are building an analytical data set on education and job outcomes. So for more on that, you can learn more at this bit.ly/C2C_1_pager, which gives you an overview of what we're working on. So enough about us. We want to hear about you. You are the most important part of this conversation today. And so we want to hear where you are coming from. So in the chat, I would love for you to share your name, where you're joining from, your organization, and whether this is your first community conversation, or if this is your sixth community conversation. We want to hear it all. So please let us know in the chat who's joining us today. And give folks a minute. Thank you, Denise. Calvary College, first community conversation. We have Orville here with Bill and Melinda Gates, first meeting. Hello. Let's see, we've got Jennifer, Jeffrey, Rick, Campaign for California, Campaign for College. It's going so fast. David, Damari, Robinson. Look, we've got a lot of folks pouring in quickly. Ryan, what about, can you help me out? Read some of these, please. I would love to see who we've got in the room.
Yeah, I saw a representative from California Department of Education, one of our data partners. First meeting for them for Glenn. I see. Welcome, Glenn.
Got Viviana Martin with Unidos joining from Sacramento. Let's see who else we've got. I'm going to scroll up a little bit because I missed a bunch of folks. Heather, Christian, Linda, John Burks. Thank you so much for joining us. Amber with Unite LA, Jennifer Scott, Department of Social Services.
Advisory board member Jackie Navarro is also here. Hi, Jackie.
Jackie, thank you. We've got Raquel from EdTrust West. Thank you for joining us as always. Lovely to see you in the chat. Great. Hello, Ben. We've got a lot of good folks in the room today, so thank you for that. We really appreciate getting to know you today. But we've got a busy agenda, so I want to head into it, but we want to make sure that we are recognizing the folks who are with us today because you are central to what we're doing and want to make sure that we are tailoring these conversations for you. So it's really important that we get to know who's joining us, from where, the types of work that you're working on, regions, all of the things, as we want to learn more about just how we're building the data system. So thank you for that. So with this, I'm going to start off heading into today's agenda. Before we dive into our panel, I will flag that we will be doing a quick CTC office update. We've heard from folks that you really want to learn more about what we're doing here, what's been going on behind the scenes. So as always, we want to give a little bit of information about that. And then we're going to have an introduction from our executive director, Marianne Bates, who is joining us today. So we're very glad to have her on. And then we'll be having a panel discussion led by our Director of Data Programs, Ryan Estriato, who will be speaking with Drs. Christopher Nellum from EdTrust West and Dr. Vikesh Reddy from the Campaign for College Opportunity, who are also CTC advisory board members. And we're so grateful to have you join. So thank you in advance, and we are looking forward to the conversation. So just quickly, I want to give a quick status update of what we've been doing. Just 1 month ago, how quickly time flies, we had an in-person governing board meeting in Sacramento where we gave governing board members status updates on what we've been doing. So at this bit.ly that you see here, we have CTC bit.ly CTC work plan. This is an updated 5-year timeline. It illustrates what we've been doing. It shows you the progress made so far and where we're headed next. So if you want to see a real-time status update of what we've been doing and where we're headed, please head there to give you more information. And I've said this in the last previous community conversation, but Cradle-to-Career is in hiring mode. We are a small but mighty team, but always looking to hire more. So we've been pleased to engage with the Work for California state's efforts for recruitment. We've been in virtual job fairs as well as in-person job fairs, and I've been meeting so many of you. So it's been awesome to kind of put faces to names. And we will soon be hiring more. We have a new principal data architect who just joined us recently. And in the coming weeks, we hope to have a chief of strategic initiatives and partnerships joining us. So you'll see a new face at our community conversations, which we're super excited about. And in the coming weeks, we have open positions for a deputy director of communications, deputy director of legislative affairs, who will be in the engagement vertical. We'll also have a budget and contract analyst available, and a research data manager working with Ryan. A deputy director of digital services also just closed in Ryan's vertical. So we will be almost doubling in size soon. So stay tuned for that. We're really looking forward to it. But for the jobs that I talked about that are not yet live, I want to make sure that folks who are interested in applying are notified when they go live on CalCareers. So if you visit ctcca.gov/work for California, you can sign up to be notified when those positions go live. You can indicate your interest level. So once the job for you goes up, we will make sure that you are notified right away. So please sign up for that. And finally, I want to flag that we have 2 advisory board meetings coming up at the tail end of this month. March 28th, we will hold our community engagement advisory board meeting. And then on March 30th, we'll have our data and tools advisory board meetings. We'll be sharing plans for our teacher dashboards, as well as our scaling of C2C's operational tools. So stay tuned for that. In compliance with Bagley-Keene, we'll be sending out notifications. So you'll see those notices and agendas going live in the coming weeks. So we'll keep you abreast of that. So with that, I'm going to hand it over today to Marianne Bates to introduce our topic and get to it.
Thanks so much, Shannon. And I'm so excited to see all of you here. Thanks for introducing yourselves in the chat. It's always fun to have these conversations. I'm excited about today's topic. I was encouraged, when Shannon sent out a survey about this, about the kinds of topics you were interested in. I was encouraged to see that today's topic, disaggregating data and using data to advance equity, was the one most requested by you. So thrilled to see that. I'm also really proud that the authorizing legislation that created the Cradle-to-Career data system gives a very clear answer to the question of why California is building this data system. And that is, and I quote, to foster evidence-based decision-making to help the state build a more equitable future. So evidence-based decision-making with the goal of helping the state build a more equitable future. So today's conversation is going to focus on that. I'm excited to hear about, stories and examples of where using data, where disaggregating data can make a difference and can help measurably advance equity. In our governance structure, which Shannon alluded to, our governing board receives recommendations from these two advisory boards, and we're honored to have today's, two renowned leaders with us, Dr. Nallum and Dr. Reddy, and we're lucky to have a governance structure that ensures that we can both learn from their expertise in formal and official meetings, and also through conversations like today's, where we can have a discussion and hear your questions and bring that all together. So I'm really looking forward to hearing their perspectives on why data matters in advancing equity, and really thank all of you for joining us. So thank you for being here. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Shannon.
Great, thank you so much, Marianne. So before we dive into today's panel, we wanted to gauge folks' comfort level, knowledge level with the topic. This will also help for planning purposes as we build more content. So on a scale of 1 to 5, we wanted to see how knowledgeable you are with data analysis and data disaggregation, 1 being novice, 5 being expert. We wanted to see how much you know about this topic and how we can tailor this conversation to you today. So looks like you got some 3s. Tanisha is a 5. David is a 2-ish. Raquel's a 2. We've got more 3s. Gucci is a 4. Andrew, we've got 4. We've got some 2s. We've got a 5. Hilda is an expert. Mary is an expert as well. So it looks like we've got kind of folks all over the place. No 1s. Oh, no, just kidding. Steve, you're a 1. Apologies. But we've got a couple of folks who know their stuff and others who are new to the discussion today. So very glad to get to know where you are as we try to think about how we can tailor our conversation today. So thank you for that, Ariana. You are a 4. Khalifa is also a 1. Great, thank you for that. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ryan, our Director of Data Programs, to begin today's panel.
Thanks, Shannon, and hi, everybody. Welcome. Gosh, I am looking at the participant list. It says 80 people. That's really great. I'm so proud to be able to hang out here with y'all. I'm grateful for you taking your time. My name is Ryan, and I'm the Director of Data Programs, and I'm going to be introducing our 2 panelists so that we can have a conversation. And I want to say just a bit of housekeeping first. We did a survey prior to this event to get a sense of what folks wanted out of it. And one of the things that we heard back is that if we were going to ask questions, that y'all wanted the questions to be able to look at and process while we were talking about them. And so as I ask questions, Shannon's going to be dropping those questions into the chat for you to read and reflect on. And we hope that helps you. So just a little bit of setup here before our introductions of our 2 panelists. We talk a lot about big ideas at Cradle-to-Career, many of them, but the 2 that are relevant for today are equity and also this idea of disaggregating data and what that means. Really big and important ideas to aspire to. But I think for one thing that we can all relate to is the challenge that comes with that, which is taking the conversation from big ideas to what the experience of those big ideas looks like in real life, in different jobs and in our families and just the way that we live and work, and bringing it out of this abstract into the concrete. We have a lot of ways that we try to do that at Cradle-to-Career. One of them is to have ongoing conversations with experts in the field who do just that, take big ideas and make them happen in their work and in their lives. And we have 2 experts here today who are also members of our advisory boards to participate in a conversation with us. So I'm going to do some introductions and then we're going to jump right into questions. Our first panelist is Dr. Vikas Reddy, who's the Vice President of Research at the Campaign for College Opportunity, which is an organization focused on improving how Californians complete college education. Dr. Reddy is a member of the Cradle-to-Career Data and Tools Advisory Board. Dr. Reddy, thank you so much for coming to Cradle-to-Career Community Conversations. How are you today?
Doing great, and thanks for having me.
All right. Glad to hear it. Second panelist, Dr. Christopher Nellam is the Executive Director at the Education Trust West, which is an organization focused on educational justice and closing achievement gaps in education. Dr. Nellam is a member of the Cradle-to-Career Community Engagement Advisory Board. Dr. Nellam, welcome to Community Conversations. How are you today?
I'm doing well. I feel like any day is a good day when I can be with fellow data geeks. I love it.
Same. Yeah, I think we've all got that in common. All right. Well, this is awesome. I'm super excited. I'm just going to jump right in into the questions here. And I would say, folks are going to be interested in what y'all do in your day-to-day work. It's all about making big ideas real and talking about in real life. So if you want to touch on the projects that you work on, I would love for you to do that. But I'll give you a little bit of structure here with the first question. And Chris, maybe we'll have you start with this one. And that question is about big topic, equity. It's that topic that we think a lot about at the stage that we're at in building the Cradle-to-Career system. We're focusing on understanding the stories of Californians, and in particular stories that don't tend to get heard a lot. And so I'd love to hear more about what using data to promote equity means to you in your work at EdTrust West. So we'll start with you, Chris, and then Vikas, we'll go to you next.
Sorry about that. My mouse decided it was on a break. But yeah, for at EdTrust West, and also just for myself, when I think about equity, for me, that word, what's under that word, at least from my vantage point, is a commitment to achieving racial equity in particular. There are lots of ways to think about equity, but for me, that's the lens through which I have conversations like this. I think there are lots of ways to use data to promote equity. One just thing that I think and believe to be true is that we actually can't achieve racial equity without thoughtful ways to disaggregate data. So drilling down, looking more closely, like you really can't achieve racial equity without doing what we're talking about today, which is disaggregating data. One of the ways that we and just I believe is really important to promote equity is bring data to people. We hear often all across the state from from parents, from students themselves, from leaders of community-based organizations. They know that there's a nagging problem in their community. They know that there's some sort of gap or inequity, and they have plenty of stories to tell. And stories, I want to be clear, are data too. But they're often looking for quantitative data to help them make a case in some way to a school board or to a superintendent, to a state agency, to their city council. So one of the ways that we use data to promote equity is, again, to bring it to folks, to bring it to people. And we do that through immersive experiences that we call data equity walks. And a lot of what that entails is asking the community, well, what matters to you? And then we go off and we put together what we call an immersive data walk, an immersive data experience, disaggregate the data so that they can see it, for their community overall. And then they can see it in their particular community by gender, by race. And so we break it down. We let folks walk around the room. We let them feel what the data suggests to them is going on. Then we allow folks to ask questions and have a conversation. So one of the ways that we use data for equity is bringing data back to the people from where the data comes from. The data really is about them and about their students and about their communities. And so we try to bring it back to community as one of the ways that we use data to advance equity.
I really love that. Like, I love that idea of there are ways to take quantifiable information and make it personal to a wider audience, like a way to connect around the stories that these numbers are supposed to be representing. And that, it sounds like such a powerful experience. Vikash, what about you? What's it like? What does it mean to promote equity through data in your day-to-day work?
Well, so I think that theme actually is one that I really love, because I think it really is about telling the real story or the whole story, right? And I think about sometimes data is the ones and the zeros that when you zoom out can give you that beautiful mosaic picture, but you've got to zoom in sometimes to actually see what you're looking at, right? And so I think we have to know, if we're going to talk about an equity gap or an achievement gap, we have to know what it is. And I am sometimes surprised at the reactions that I receive from people who know the storyline, but who say, oh, I didn't realize that this gap was growing. I thought that graduation rates were increasing for everybody. And the truth is, maybe they were increasing for everybody. And that's the storyline that got told. But the one that didn't get told is, so is the gap, right? That it's increasing for some faster than others. And seeing the looks of surprise when you do within community disaggregations. And so I think about our state of higher education for Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Californians, and sort of highlighting that even that is a big monolithic category. And there are a lot of stories to tell within that group that are really consequential for educational attainment, for the types of supports and the places where we need to add supports for students, right? And I think that speaks to Chris's point that, if we're not looking at the data at all points along the pathway and saying, how are these interventions, these programs working for some students, and certain students, are they working better for some students? And, what is it that we need to do? We're not going to make the progress that we need to make. And so I think it really is important, just from the storytelling perspective, like I say, when even experts can be surprised. I think, I mentioned one report that we do. That's one of a series that we do where we really do look at individual communities within the state. I think about our strategic plan calls on us to lead all of our work with a racial equity lens, right? And so thinking about, how do the programs that we advocate work for students of color and work for, gender equity is also important. There are a number of different dimensions along which we all need to disaggregate these data. I think it's easy for us to talk about the racial, ethnic, and the gender ones. Those are maybe a little more top of mind, but it's important to look at our students as folks have said in the chat, as individuals, right? And to see at a finer grained level, how do we support students, and how do we see, in particular, I think data can be powerful in telling us where we're doing well in supporting students and where, we're losing students, to sort of target other types of research and intervention.
I want to dig into this a little bit more. Vikash, maybe we can stay with you on this, and then we'll go to Chris. In my experience, learning to use data is a little bit of a personal journey, in the sense of it can be really exciting at first, and then you use it more, you become more acquainted with it. And what happened with me is I began to see some of the limitations of it, and that's what prompted me to sort of think more about how do we make this experience of data more representative of the people that we are trying to either help or build data products for. And I'm really learning a lot from both of you already, just in that first question about the advanced stages of that kind of thinking that y'all are in. When was the moment, Vikash, that you sort of realized, or what is a moment, because maybe it was a few of them, where you realized, gotta do this a little bit differently?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't know that there's a moment or a seminal moment, right? I mean, I think just, through my sort of pre-grad school career and into grad school, understanding just the way in which we speak about race, the way in which, leaders are making policy or using data or not using data, I think was clear. I think certainly maybe some of the grad school data courses have contrived examples that will show you that once you add the race ethnicity variable, you get a lot of explanatory power, but it's true outside of the contrived experiences also, right? So I think just in learning all of, finding my data sets and doing those, learning all of that, you see it, right? You can see from that nerdy perspective that whether it's a coefficient, whether it's an R squared, whether it's whatever it is, right? These parameters of a model, you get a lot of explanation. And so, I think to me, it's just from a research standpoint, if you're looking for explanatory power, you should probably be thinking about these other factors. But I think I am also, so I talked about folks who are surprised by some of what they see. I remember getting feedback from somebody on a report, and he said, you need to disaggregate this particular variable that you have by foreign born or natural born, right? And you're going to see some, and I went to Stata, I opened it up, I did that. And I was blown away by, what I saw. I expected a difference, but it was like a 70-30 thing, right? And so, just sort of, it was a good reminder to me to think about kind of, what is going on? What are the things that can help you understand, the story that you're telling, and to think about other ways you might want to disaggregate data. And so I think it comes to me in all of these, like I say, I am sometimes surprised. And so have to remind myself to keep doing that, taking that step.
Thanks for that. Yeah, that's super interesting. Also, side note, shout out to Stata and mentions of statistical programming. Love that. Only here at Community Conversations. Chris, how about you? Do you have a moment where your data use just kind of took a turn where you just knew you had to do it differently?
Yeah, it's actually not an education example. Before I worked in education, I actually was a therapist. So I was seeing folks in the field in Long Beach, and I was at Cal State Long Beach, go Beach, and was sort of interning somewhere, and we realized that some of the folks we were seeing, two things were happening. Folks were not getting appointments in the same ways that others, and then that others were. So folks wanted access to the services that were being provided at the center where I was interning. And then there were different outcomes in terms of who was coming back for return services. And just sort of day to day, I think we thought things were fine. And then realized actually that Cambodian folks in Long Beach, who are actually a very large population there, were getting less access to appointments and were more likely to come back for return appointments if they saw a therapist or if they saw a counselor. So that to me, it just made me stop and say, like, we have to think about what we're doing day to day and whether or not folks are experiencing what we're providing. So education, or in this case, it was therapy. Are folks experiencing what we're providing in similar or different ways? And that was, for me, was an aha moment. And so the center started collecting data, better data, and actually using it, broken down by race, broken down by gender, race and gender. And so that actually then led me down the very proudly nerdy path on the education front around disaggregating data.
Yeah, something I'm hearing from both of those stories is the discovery that what you both saw in real life and what you saw in the data were connected, but somehow like there had to be some filling in of more of the details there, like in like almost sense like an intuitive, kind of the alarms go off. You're just like, there's more story to this that we have to sort of uncover. I want to turn to a term or a phrase that's come up a few times now, and we kind of opened up with this idea of disaggregating data. We did some surveys with our community to ask about what was important to them, either to learn about or just in their data use, and disaggregating data comes up all the time. And while we have both of you here, I think it'd be a great opportunity to really dig into that and talk about what that actually means broadly, but even like in the actual work, like why is this a valuable thing, and and how is it done? So Vikash, maybe we can start with you on this. What's your take on disaggregating data in terms of like what it means on a practical level, sort of high level, and then how is it that you are deploying that technique in your work, and what are the values that come out of it?
I mean, to me, at the high level, it's going beyond a statewide average or a citywide average and looking at what is the average for Black students in California? What is the rate at which we are supporting Latinx students in California to enroll in college? Is that different or higher or lower than students of other races and ethnicities? Like I said, you can't calculate a gap unless you know percentages for subpopulations, right? And so On a practical level, it means if you're running a regression, you want to do that with you want to either include those variables, or maybe you want to subgroup that and just run your regression only on subsets, right? There are different ways to cut that. If you're looking at descriptive data, and we do a lot of this at the campaign, I would say is we're a much more descriptive research organization, but still you can break that down, right? What is, we know that X percentage of students are earning an ADT. Well, if it's 25% of Black associate degree earners are earning an ADT, I'm making these numbers up. I probably should have had that report pulled up. But it's 40% of white ADT earners, and we've got to study what is going on. Why is there differential attainment or access to, or is it access? Is it support? Is it but there's a differential in attainment, right? And so just on a very practical level, it's running your analyses for different subgroups, and my examples have been race, ethnicity based, but looking at this by gender, looking at this by whatever makes sense for the question that you're looking at, right? And so thinking about where might there be differential impacts, and then with the lens of how do we support students to reach that highest number, right? How do we, if we can support one group of students to get to 60% of something, then we can support other groups of students to get to 60% of something, right? Like this doesn't have to be everybody reverting to the mean. This can be, we can raise the mean by ensuring we're supporting all of our subgroups to our highest standards.
Vikash, you brought up a couple of terms there for the audience. Descriptive statistics. I'm gonna try my best on this, and you can tell me if I've got it right. That is by descriptive statistics you mean, or analysis you mean looking at figures and just noticing differences by particular groups without necessarily applying some evaluation of that difference is so big that we would consider that statistical significant.
Not quite. I think, thank you for backing me up, because I do that sometimes. I just sort of start dropping terms. What I'm talking about is you've got, there's sort of the more technical research where we say, well, we've got this gap between population A and population B, but we also know that geography will explain some of that, and we know that gender might explain some of that, and we know that other factors might explain, and we can model all of that into a regression and try to explain some of this and get to the adjusted difference between groups. And maybe we can explain it all with these other factors, and that's great. But when I talk about descriptors, what I'm just saying is here's the average, and there might be other factors that we do, and it's important for us to interrogate those averages, right? And say, is there something that helps us explain that? But it doesn't necessarily try to do that in a highly technical statistical sense. It'll just sort of present, here are group averages. So again, important to understand kind of and think about the storylines and what's happening that drives those averages, but doesn't necessarily try to adjust for those in the statistical sense.
Got it. Chris, what about you? Disaggregated data, what does it look like in your everyday work? What's the value of it to you in a practical sense?
Yeah, and are we looking for examples here too?
Yeah, I would love examples.
Yeah, I think so, a couple of things. I think the data we often see is aggregated. Some people might call that summarized, or some people would call that rolled up data. You might hear some of that. I think when you talk about disaggregating data, it's really just about breaking things down. That's how I think about it. Or drilling down or separating into parts. So that's just one, just sort of how I try to, disaggregating sounds fancier probably than it really is. It's really just taking a closer look, breaking it down. 3 examples, maybe 2, for the sake of time, that I hope a lot of people can identify with. One is, for folks in particular who have kids, I think a question on parents' minds is like, well, can they read? Can they read? By when do they read? 3rd grade for parents, as we know, is a really important milestone. So if you look at the aggregated data in this state, about 42% of 3rd graders in our state are meeting or exceeding standards by 3rd grade in reading. Now, 42, that maybe points to some sets of questions or ideas about maybe different things need to be happening in the state. Or some people might see that and say, oh, that's actually not all that bad, and we have some room to go. But if you break that data down, I think it points to a set of really different questions. Only 26% of Black third graders are at that level, compared to 58% of white third graders in California, compared to 31% of Latino or Latinx third graders. And so that's a question that many parents probably have in the state. You could ask that same question of your school and break it down by race and in similar ways. And so being able to see that data broken down, I think points to maybe we need to be putting specific attention on Black and Latino students, given they have some room. The state can do better by them. And so that's one example. The other I'm going to borrow from our friends at the Asian American Pacific Islander data organization, AAPI data. Another is, folks in our state, we have a fast growing Asian American and Pacific Islander set of populations in the state. And so someone may wonder, well, how well do they do? How well are we doing in supporting their attainment? I'm borrowing this from their website, but overall, things might look good, but you see that actually the state does better at bachelor's degree attainment or maybe nationally for Taiwanese students at 75% versus Filipino students at 48%. So I think there's a whole set of questions about the model minority myth related to these sets of populations. But when you look at the numbers, you might want to focus more on Vietnamese and Burmese and Hmong students, given that we have some room to go on bachelor's degree attainment for those groups in particular. So those are two examples. There are many, many others. But I think the big takeaway is that when you aggregate data, you're masking differences. And those differences are important to see from my perspective, not because those individual groups are innately worse, it's that we are doing a worse job at supporting them. And so those are two examples. I hope they're helpful. Happy to think about some others.
I think those are really great examples. I want to say this topic a little bit, kind of veer off the script with a practical question that we didn't include in the preview, but I think it'd be interesting just to ponder together, which is if I am a data user, say I'm a parent, and I want to get better at understanding the way this works because my child's going to be going to school, and I want to understand the community better and sort of educational outcomes, and just take that next step to becoming a more sort of data informed decision maker. But I'm just starting. I go on a website. I understand there seems to be this idea of like looking at smaller, groups versus the whole thing. What's my next step? How would you, let's stay with you on this, Chris, and we'll go to Vikash. Like, what would your advice be for me as like a new data user? And I just want to use this better.
As a user, let me know if I'm answering this correct. I think if you're going to a dashboard or you're going to your school districts or your colleges or your early care centers website, maybe a lot of folks, you may see some numbers like 50% or 70%, and I think you might want to see if on their website there's an option to often it's like a drop-down menu to say do you want to see this in a particular way? So looking for those places to either click something or drop down and ask for a finer grained look. That's one thing. The other way, and I think it's a fine way, is to go to your school, go to your school board, go to your college leadership and say, I need you all to break this down and present it on your website in a way that's easy for someone like me to see and find. And so one way is to ask the web portal to do it by clicking. The other way is to make the request of the school or college. I think that's a fine request, particularly for institutions. They are public servants. So those are two ideas. Yeah,
that is such a great point, right? Is and such a wonderful opportunity for sort of connection, with the folks who are serving kids in public. And so I hadn't thought about that, but embarrassingly, I hadn't thought about that. And that makes a ton of sense. Vikash, what about you? I'm a fairly new data user, I want to get better at this. I know, I have some big life decisions I got to make, for my family, and I want to do this a little bit better. What's your advice for me looking at like publicly available dashboards?
Yeah, I mean, I share Chris's. I think the ones that sort of the dashboards that are built for public use are some are better than others, but do, I think, try to offer intuitive portraits. I would stay away from some of the back end spreadsheets if you're not as familiar. You can get pretty intense in those. And yeah, I think, talking to folks who do understand, I think Chris is right. You can talk to folks at colleges, you can talk to your folks at your high schools, or people who do use these data and who use these dashboards more frequently. I think, as with most of these things, there's rewards for tenacity. And so, and then the other thing is, if you're I always talk about this sort of knowing just enough to be dangerous, right? If you're not sure that you know what you're looking at, read the reports that at Trust West that those of us are, who are using the data. We're trying to, part of what we're doing is trying to make these data accessible for folks, right? And so, I know I don't always succeed in that, and you can certainly email me as the author of something at the campaign if it's not clear. But make use of the things that we're up to, that we're working on. Hopefully they are helpful to folks out there.
All right, my turn to miss the mute button. Sorry about that. Okay, so we've got a little bit of time left. I think we've got time for maybe 2 questions. I want to go right to a question I'm seeing in the chat here from Holly. Holly, I hope that I'm pronouncing your name right. Please correct me if I'm not in the chat. And Holly asks, okay, let me to the right here. Okay. Holly says, I'm a newer data analyst and agree with the general arguments for disaggregation to address concerns and needs for specific communities. But I also know there are sometimes increased concerns of re-identification with disaggregation of demographic data. Does anyone on this call have any recommendations for resources and best practices on how to keep disaggregated data secure and prevent re-identification? I'll add just a little bit of context for the audience here, as I think what this question is getting at, and Holly, again, just correct me if I'm wrong about this, is that when we have the opposite of disaggregated data, so aggregated data, this is like so-called group data or rolled up data. One of the benefits of that is in looking at a larger group, it becomes very difficult or impossible most of the time to disclose like who people actually are, right? And so when you then break that into smaller groups, it becomes on accident, not intentional by any way, but it can be, if it's not done well, it can be easier to then identify who people are. And so I think Holly's question is, how do we deal with that? How do we deal with the trade-off? Chris, maybe we could say with you, and get your just sort of general reaction to that as a problem, and sort of how you think about it, and then we'll go to Vikash.
Sure. I think, certainly we want data to be used in ethical ways, and we certainly don't want to disclose who individual people are. And so this is a good question. I think the technicalities of like what the threshold is differ. When I was in DC, there was, I feel like the magic number was 30. I've seen 10 other places. And so I think one question to ask yourself is just the ethical question, like, are we breaking this down in a way that's too fine grained, so that, if we only have two Black students at our school, that might make it very easy to figure out who those 2 individuals are. I think the other is to come up with or to check with your campus or system about what the rules are, because there's some that's set for certain systems. So I think that's one set of thoughts. The other, though, is I think we should be careful. So holding both of those things true, I also sometimes feel like folks hide behind conversations about re-identification. I'm not suggesting Holly is, but other folks do, and say, well, we can't do this because of this fear. And I think that that's a fair thing to say, but I think we as members of the community should still push folks and say, that doesn't mean you get to ignore that group of students, Maybe we do the data work in a more private way and then share our recommendations in a more public way. But it doesn't mean just don't do it. Just don't do it. We often see this in our state around Asian American Pacific Islander students. There are certain agencies in our state that have decided not to report data for certain subgroups for fear of re-identification, but then we don't see any policymaking or any conversation about those young people because of that. And so I think we have to be like, yes, we should be ethical and be safe, but also not let folks off the hook from having important conversations for folks who may have small numbers in the population. So those are two sets of thoughts that I hope are helpful.
Yeah, I think that's super helpful. Vikash, do you have a take on re-identification, that topic?
I mean, yeah, I think, Chris is exactly right. I think the question is exactly right. We need to be protecting student privacy, and that's important for, reasons I don't need to expound. And yeah, first things first, follow the recommendations and the rules of the data that you're given. And 10 is the smallest I've seen. Likewise, I've seen 30. I think I saw a comment from Marianne that 30 is roughly the heuristic for C2C. And that will sometimes leave you with unsatisfying tables that have some blanks in them. And so, I know we give out, or we produce lists on community colleges, and there are certainly, when we disaggregate, we have to leave a number of rows blank, in particular, and thinking about sort of Black students in the ADT process, right? And so one of our metrics that we use is for all of the associate degrees earned, how many of those were associate degrees for transfer. You can imagine that at some colleges in the state, the population of Black students is pretty low. And so you have maybe fewer than 10 associate degree for transfer earners, which means that we can't populate that cell in our sheet. Well, the first thing is, hopefully we can get to 10 or more at most colleges, right? So there's a point to be made there around the fact that we have so many empty cells. And then there are other things, don't give up the ghost at that point. See if you can maybe think about things regionally. Maybe you aggregate to a region, then you still keep your data disaggregated by race, ethnicity. Find a way to tell the story. There will be one that, hopefully there will be one that allows you to tell the nuanced story, but protect students and their families in terms of identification. Because, we've got to find a way to get that information, even if it's a little bit grainier than we want it to be, if that, maybe that means aggregating over a couple of years and using a multi-year average so that you can total things up, right? And that's going to be great. So there are ways to do these things and try to be creative in finding them when they're important. And I, as I said earlier, I think these things are important far more often than we say they are.
Thank you for that. One of the things I find myself during these community conversation events, like I always think like, oh, maybe like I wish these were longer because we should talk more about this. I hope everybody feels that way. If you do, I think that's a really good sign. I think we're sort of inching towards like the really important questions here. And unfortunately, we're at time here, and I want to leave just at least a minute to express gratitude to both of you for not only taking the time here to share your expertise with us, but also for being members of our advisory boards and helping us to make Cradle-to-Career what it needs to be and to be the public service and public good that it needs to be. I really appreciate it. I know the rest of the office very much appreciates it, and look forward to more collaboration, more pushing towards trying to get this done right. I will just say personally too, I am inspired from by your responses in the way that I could just tell you refuse to give up on the tough questions about data. We sort of bump up against these, and I think Chris, you kind of referenced this earlier. It can, it can be easy to say like it's too complicated or too risky, and I really admire how much you push against that to find solutions that work, and then also how clearly you communicate them so that we can all learn from you. So thank you so much for being here, and for being at the event. And I'm going to turn it back over to Shannon to close this out. Thank you both so much.
Thank you all. Before we close out, we're going to have a couple of minutes for Q&A. This will give the members of the public an opportunity to answer some questions or ask some questions you may have. But before we dive into that, I want to highlight some comments that came through from members of the public that I thought were really great that I want to share verbally. So Brooke first said, first, remembering that every data point comes from a person, namely students and families. What is the story that data is telling us when we're analyzing the data or setting goals and benchmarks for it? Who is setting those? Why? How are we advancing everyone with data as an asset or as a tool? So thank you for that, Brooke. Tanisha says, reviewing the data and creating an actionable plan to minimize gaps. We can discuss equity gaps all day, but unless we have a plan, we are not moving forward. Ariana says, aggregation makes it easier to develop false narratives about how the systems are working that become rationale for not making necessary changes in education to benefit, especially BIPOC students. And Clarissa says, I really appreciate you all bringing up the need to disaggregate AAPI data on Chamorro, indigenous to Guam. And I know many Micronesians needs aren't seen because they are grouped into AAPI. We definitely need to refine how we look at the PI data. So thank you for those comments. And we have a couple of questions. So from Steve, in the start of this meeting, there was a highlight about data-driven decision-making. I was wondering if part of the C2C program will include computation tools, statistical modeling, and some simulations to process data sets. Apologies for my speaking over myself. Maybe Ryan, you want to tackle this one?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a really interesting question. You know, right now we're really focused on the data dashboards, which in by way of visualization and good writing and guidance and prompts for the users will resemble something that is closer to what Dr. Reddy was talking about earlier, which is like the descriptive statistics. At the same time, I don't totally want to discount the possibility of doing more complicated analysis on that. So using statistical models to determine determine this sort of the sizes of differences and how big those actually are, effect sizes and stuff like that. So I think the answer to that question is that's something that we're thinking about. At the moment is not the first focus of the design of the dashboards, but with this much data and the opportunity to learn as much as we can, I think we do have to be thinking about those things for sure.
Thank you for that. We also had two questions that were answered in the Q&A by Mary Ann, but I just want to surface them. We had an anonymous attendee ask, will we be able to pull data on students that students that are parents through the C2C data? Mary Ann said you can see the summary of data points. Our partners plan to share with us here, pointing to our data elements by provider. At this time, we do not have data points that will enable us to identify which students are student parents, but if you're not the first to ask this question, and we understand that it would be valuable. So thank you for that. And Andrew asked, does the scope of the initiative allow for providing data quality reports to help users ask critical questions of the underlying data, validity, accuracy, timeliness, completeness, etc.? If so, how is that aspect being approached? And Marianne says a short answer is yes. When starting the point for data dictionaries and documentation, we will share on our website, and we'll also share our data documentation. Our research data request process will also enable that type of analysis. So thank you, Marianne, for answering those. So with that, I am going to open this up. Finally, we have a couple more questions. Any final questions for Dr. Prakash or Dr. Chris as we have them on today? Okay, we have one open, anonymous attendee. From my understanding, if we understand or even open to the need for disaggregating data as a necessary step towards racial equity, are there any barriers that C2C is facing that will prevent this new data system from having disaggregated data being both publicly accessible and the established norm? There's a two-parter. Two, how can we, community advocates, continue to push for disaggregated data for all ethnic groups, AANHPI, WANA, tribal communities, and more as the new standard for data for C2C? And that one, I think, can probably be answered by anybody on this call. Does anybody want to? Maybe that's a big one. Maybe I misspoke.
I mean, I will tell you that I will, in the meetings that I attend, continue to ask. I've sort of garnered a reputation at one or two academic conferences as being the guy who asked, well, but did you disaggregate by race, ethnicity? Are there any heterogeneity? So I am that voice on my committee. There are a few of us, I should say, but we'll continue to be that voice. Would encourage you to keep coming to community conversations and bringing this up, because I think squeaky wheels do get grease on these things.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. Plus one to that, I will also say one barrier that I think about a lot is our the gap between what we as designers understand as the need with disaggregated data and what our community wants out of that. And thankfully, that's a barrier we can overcome, because it just requires us to make sure that it's safe enough for these conversations to happen, and for us to have an open mind to learn about what the experience needs to be like for the users who are going in and wanting to get more out of the data than just the average. I think the idea of disaggregation, we can all agree, is a good one, but then the next step is for us to understand what must that experience be like for our users to say, like, wow, I really got something out of this. And so again, like, thankfully, that's a barrier that we can overcome.
Great. Well, it looks like we have come to an end for the Q&A today. Thank you everyone for attending, but particularly for our guests, Vikash and Chris. It's so nice to have you on. And again, I cannot express my thanks enough. These are two C2C advisory board members who are taking the time out of their busy schedule, in addition to all of the other stuff that they have to do for C2C. So it is not lost on me that this was quite the ask, but we are so appreciative of your expertise and knowledge today. This is helping us guide the work that we're doing here at Cradle-to-Career. So we are super, super thankful to have you on. And thank you all for everybody who is entering their stuff in the chat. It was so great to have you all today to just hear from your experiences. I really appreciate the color that you've all provided. And as always, please sign up for our emails so that we can stay abreast of the topics that we've got coming up. You can make sure to be included on any upcoming meetings that we've got, and any kind of opportunities for user-centered design that we'll be broaching soon. So very excited about that. And again, thank you all for today. Thank you, Marianne, for joining us today. Thank you, Ryan, for moderating the panel. And with that, I hope you have a good afternoon. Thank you again for sharing your lunchtime with us. I know it's a commitment, but we appreciate these opportunities to engage. So thank you, and I hope you all have a good day. And thank you, Mark, and thank you, Leticia. Always appreciate it.